All right. Hi, yes, hello, everyone. I'm Gavin.js, and welcome to this Monday morning stream. Uh, it's been a hot minute because last week wasn't able to jump on, but this week I'm excited because we're going to talk about some vector controls, some noise controls, some vector space controls. If you don't know what I'm talking about there, don't worry. We'll get into it in a hot second. But hello. I hope your Monday is going well, has gone well, will go well, whatever time of day it is for you. I hope you're having a good one. And yeah, it's going to be a good week. I can feel it. I can feel it in my bones. It's going to be a good week. So, uh, yeah, I don't know. I don't have much to ramble about today before we get into it. So, I'm a little bit excited for this one. So, why don't we just hop into it and just bring up Blender? I swear, every week I'm like, how do I get which button is it that I press to switch between the scenes? I need to just make buttons. I have a programmable keyboard. So I should be able to just have like a button on my keyboard that just switches. Anyway, rambling about nonsense. So, we are in Blender. I've got the scene set up pretty straightforward, just a plane with some geometry nodes. And what we're going to do is set up some controls for some noise textures. And before we get into that, I kind of want to just bring up A, a noise texture, and B, let's bring up the inspiration for this, the Gabor texture. Last time I streamed, we talked about the Gabor texture and how it's really neat, and how when we switch to 3D, we get this little guy, which is so neat. It shows kind of what direction in 3D space this noise is going to face, because Gabor noise, let's actually bring up a grid. I know we have a grid here, but it's only got 4 vertices. We need more vertices. Actually, I can show that. There's like no geometry here basically. If we plug this in, it'll get smaller. We'll have some lines here in the middle, and we can crank up the amount of geometry, right? Very straightforward. So let's just get a bunch of stuff in there, and then switching back to shaded view, we can take a look at the value of this Gabor texture. And it's not really showing very well. Yeah, the phase will show it a little better. Let's turn the scale up so we can see more of it. And then we can see as we play around with this, the orientation changes. It's not very apparent right now because we're looking at this on a 2D surface. But in 3D, we can see a lot more of what's going on. And in fact, why don't we just get that set up now? Because we're going to be playing around with volume cubes. And if I remember correctly, the last time I streamed, we were discussing, we were making terrain on just 2D planes. And I got a great question of how would you project this into 3D, or how would you add like overlaps? Because if you're just offsetting the heights on a 2D plane, you get interesting terrain, but you can't have any like cliffs that overhang, you know? You don't get any like really 3D noise. And this is kind of the solution to that. What we do is we take a look at a volume cube, and let's just do real quick volume to mesh, because looking at this density here, kind of hard to tell what the heck is going on. So if we take a look at this, we have we have a cube. We have a cube with a bunch of noise on it, but that's not very interesting. Instead, what we want to do is set this to the density, get rid of this connection so we're not looking at that. And now we have some 3D noise. We're cutting into this volume cube, which is pretty neat. Let's turn that noise scale down. And now you can kind of see where it's cutting in, but because we're taking a look at the phase, it's going to go from 0 to 1 pretty quickly, so we're just getting a couple of lines cut into it. Let's bring in a math node and use a compare, and now we can turn down what is true and what is false. The compare is going to output a value that's either 0 or 1 based on what value we're comparing the input to and how much leeway we give it. The epsilon is kind of this, okay, we have a value, but float values get a little weird when you're comparing them, so we're going to give it a range to compare around. And so now we're able to control pretty precisely where we do and don't have volume in our volume cube. So yeah, now we can see all of those kind of layers. The Gabor texture is pretty good at creating lines with some noise. We discussed that a lot last time. Last time we kind of just talked about the Gabor texture and then tried to apply it. So now, if we go ahead and rotate this, it may not be the easiest to see, but we can see as I rotate it from left around to right, these layers are changing their orientation, which is really cool. But the Gabor texture is the only texture that has this kind of control. And I want that kind of control for all of the textures, specifically our noise texture, because that is more or less my default texture, if that makes sense. There's a lot you can do with it, especially if you combine it with more versions of itself with all the different settings, right? And then combine it with other noise textures that we'll probably talk about later. Don't hold me to that. We might get sidetracked and only talk about the noise texture. I say that because last time I was like, oh yeah, we'll talk about this 3D control here, and I don't think we ever did. And I feel a little bad because I'm like, that's like the most impressive part of this texture. So anyway, all of that is kind of the prelude to what we're going to do today, which is setting up the controls for noise texture to mirror what we have in the Gabor texture, plus extra controls, to be completely honest. So let's get rid of that. Let's get rid of the input because we don't need it for the moment. And honestly, we're going to get rid of everything but our volume texture. We do need this output, and in fact, we're going to set up the output to actually be the output, so we don't need the viewer node, because for the moment, we don't need the viewer node. But okay, so we have all of this. Something that's important to keep in mind is that really these are the only two geometry nodes, right? Literal geometry nodes that we're going to be using for the time being. There's some stuff we can do later, but right now that's really it. Everything else is going to be playing around with noise and data. Like we're going to be playing around with vectors and floats, so no geometry. Nothing's going to have geometry until it gets to this point. And if that doesn't make sense, let me know. I'd love to explain further. But hello, Salah. How's it going? Hope you're having a fine Monday. Let's talk a little bit more about this noise texture, right? So texture nodes, they all have a vector input. God, I'm pretty sure they all have a vector input. Every now and again, I'm like, oh man, I can say a general thing about all of these and it's 100% true. Sometimes I forget the little details, but anyway, we have this vector input, and that's largely what we're going to be controlling today. It's fun to play around with like layering noise like this, and I've had some fun playing around with that, and that's largely what we were doing last time. And then after stream, I played around a little bit more with trying to layer textures together in this sort of a manner. But it's really hard to control. So instead of doing that, what we're going to do is bring in not a dial gizmo, if I could get the right one. There we go, a transform gizmo. And we're going to use this to control our noise textures. So why don't we just plug this in so that we get an idea of where we're going here. And let's bring our compare node, not that one, our compare node back in so that it's a little easier to see exactly what's going on. Okay, Let's turn off normalize for now. That's not going to be a permanent thing, but it'll just make it easier to see, what's going on here. Actually, you know what? With normalize turned off, we can get rid of the compare node. The reason is, this is going to go from -1 to 1, right? Discussed that pretty extensively. And because of that, this density is basically going to look for anything that's above 0. Since we haven't given it any other cutoff, it's just going to say, is there density or not? And if it's got a negative value, there's no density. And that's why we're able to see all of this. Let's also turn down the scale for a moment so it's really easy to see, okay, we've got, density here, no density there, yada, yada. What we want to do now is bring in all of the controls for our gizmo, because it's really nice. We see all of these controls here, and we're going to set it up so that can transform the input space for our noise texture. By default, this just uses position, which is why there's no dot here. So it's going to take the position of every voxel in this grid and use that to calculate what the noise would be at that voxel. And so we're going to transform the vector so that it's reading the values differently and therefore outputting a different density, right? So let's get a couple of no, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's bring in a combine transform node. This is really important because our transform gizmo expects a matrix. That's what this, what would you call that color? Like a chartreuse? Question mark? No, that's like a green, isn't it? I always picture a red. But anyway, whatever color you want to call this, this is a matrix socket. So we need a matrix, and we could just have a matrix input. This would work just fine, except we have all 16 inputs here, and we have to know which one's what to control our translation, rotation, and scale independently. And that's a headache. I was trying to do it like that before I remembered we have a combined transform node, so that will make our lives so much easier. Now, in order to control all of these things independently and be able to reset them when we create a custom node here, because that's the goal today, to create a custom node to give us easy controls for our vector inputs. But in order to do that, we need a bunch of vector inputs for the time being. Magenta, thank you. Yup, magenta. I don't know why I just kind of brain farted on that, but thank you, I appreciate it. Anyway, so now we've got a vector that we can use to control our input. So we move around the input in our 3D viewport, we can see our values shift here. But of course, it's not doing anything because nothing's connected, right? In order to actually have this transform our space, we actually need to plug this into our vector. But now it's just going to read those values for every single point. And that's not really going to do anything for us. Like if it's going to kind of just blink on and off because all three of our inputs have the same value. So it's going to read the same values for every single voxel in the entire grid. That's not really what we want. So what we want to do is get a position node and then use some vector math to transform that position. So yeah, since we're going to go for translation here, real simple, we can just take our position and add this to all of our points. Now if we drag our arrows, it's working correctly, except it's inverted. So let's do one more vector math node, do scale, and what we'll do is just set this to -1. Super easy, super simple. Very nice. If we drag it now, it feels right? We can just drag it back and forth and it works as you would expect, which is just so nice. That's so much easier than trying to do that this way, having an add and you just manually scrolling here in geometry nodes. This is so much better. So now let's get another vector and let's reset all of that and plug that into rotation. I don't really remember if there's a rotation input for this, but for now we're just going to run with it because we'll change this here in a hot second. Anyway, we can use the rotation and we can I think it's rotate vector. Yeah, we can rotate vector, take that same rotation, plug it in here, and now we should be able to, yeah, it's hard to tell. Let me do top down here. Now we're rotating that space. You can see how this kind of blobby cutout here is rotating from up here to down there. So we are rotating based on, or around this corner. I think that's because the grid has, yeah, the grid's got this set as 0, 0. Huh. I forget if that stays the same as we build out the rest of this. For now, we're not going to worry about that. We're just going to say, cool, we've got our rotation set up. The only thing I want to adjust here is that we rotate this direction. Everything rotates that direction. And that's not what we want. So, same sort of thing. We're just going to not do that. We're going to invert our rotation. And now with our transform gizmo selected, we rotate this and it rotates the direction we expect it to. Very straightforward. Very straightforward and very satisfying to play around with once you have it set up, you know? So the last thing we need to set up is our scale. And again, it's basically the same sort of thing, except we're going to multiply our space by our scale. Plug this in. And we do need to make sure that the default here is 1 instead of 0. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we set up the node group for this. So we have our scale. Let's select our gizmo. And I believe we should be able to, hold on a second. Let's reset our rotation so that everything should work as expected, and it's not. Oh goody. Okay, what has happened here? That's odd. I don't think I've had that error before. Okay. Let's see. What could be causing that? The good news is I do have a version of this where it works and whatnot, so I can reference my notes if need be, if I can't figure this out on the fly. That is weird. Oh. Some days you just forget to plug it into the transform gizmo, right? So these are all set to 1. There we go. Now it's all stretching and squishing as we would expect. And I go a little bit back and forth here on should that squish or should that stretch? And it's kind of up to you. We can try inverting it, see if that feels better. Like when we pull it this way, should it squish? Did that do anything? Hold on. Interesting. Yeah, scale's the only one that I haven't really made up my mind on whether or not we should invert it, because yeah, I don't know if it feels intuitive to make it so that you pull it out and it gets compressed, or if you push it in, it gets stretched. But inverting it doesn't really change anything, so I'm not entirely sure how we would make that feel more intuitive. For right now, we're just gonna leave it as is, because it works well enough, right? It functions, and that's more important. I'd love it if it had intuitive controls, because that is basically what we're going for, right? But it's workable in its current state. And yeah, to be completely honest, that's basically everything. So let's just make this look a little bit nicer. And then we'll talk about one more control that I want to have. Well, a couple more controls, because while this is everything, this is kind of the bare minimum. That's what I'm looking for here. This is the bare minimum level of control that I want. So we're going to add a couple more here in a second. But first, let's just clean this up. So, I want to have scale kind of in a nice column there. We'll have these all in a nice row. Let's create some reroute nodes. And just align everything. I like to have all of my reroutes just kind of keep things in a nice line for me. And try and keep things as organized as possible. Let's move all this out here. Trying to remember, how did I organize all of this so that it looked nice? Yeah, we're just going to take a second and vibe while we organize this, because organizing and labeling your nodes is so important. I don't think I could stress that enough. Sometimes I get a little too finicky with it, but it's just important, you know? If you get lost in your nodes, how helpful are they really? Do we want this up this way? Nah, I think that's good enough. I had a specific way of organizing this so that it looked nice, and now it's completely lost, which is fine. I think part of the problem is I have all of these inputs here. Let's not do that. Instead, what we're going to do is just group all. I frame everything so often. That was the habit. But we're going to group all of this and label it. Make sure they're in the right order. And make sure we have all of our defaults set up. So, first off, let's bring our, what is this? The scale. The first input needs to be the last. There we go. So this is going to be translation rotation and scale. Fantastic. Now translation defaults of 0, rotation defaults of 0, scale we're going to have default to 1, because if it defaults to 0, we won't have any geometry, which is a problem. Okay, and last thing I want to do, or why I say last thing, something we want to make sure we do is change this from vector to rotation. It's not a big deal. You can kind of switch between rotations and vectors, but it's not the best. There are some optimization things that it's like, yeah, you want to stay with rotation if you can. You don't want to cast from vector to rotation, but kind of minor. So long as you know what's going on, it's not a big deal, but I'd like to keep that as a rotation. And yeah, that just feels a lot nicer to me. So there we go. Yeah, let's just drag all of those out to the side there. Bring that in the middle so it makes a little bit more sense. Nope. Bring that to the bottom. I thought that was the middle input for a second. It is not. But cool. We have our transformations of all the vectors. We've got our initial vector. We've got all of the operators, and we have our output. And of course, the transform gizmo itself. Cool. So that's all fine and dandy, right? And I guess I didn't really show off using all of those together. We're able to rotate things pretty freely. We can translate them. We can scale them. The scale, again, a little bit weird, but it's not the biggest deal. But yeah, that kind of solves a big problem that I've had of just trying to control our noise in an intuitive manner so that it's easier to layer noise together. And speaking of layering noise together, let's add a couple more inputs, because I want an input that just is a vector input. Just clean slate. Let's just add in arbitrary vector so that we have the same sort of control as our noise texture does, right? We can input a vector and that'll kind of offset the entire space uh, as we want it to. Like this defaults to position. This will also default to position, but we should have the ability to add in an additional vector if we want to. So, let's add in another add node and take this vector and plug it in here. I'm going to bring this up to the top because that just kind of feels right to me. There we go. Awesome. And one more thing is I want to have kind of a global scale, right? So on our noise texture, we have this scale, which can adjust the scale of the entire noise, right? I like it so that we can have basically like a scale input here, and we can take this float, put it in the front here, and yeah, that scale, I'm just going to call it global scale because we already have a scale, right? I hope that makes sense, just adding in an extra float. The only thing there is we should have another gizmo for that. So let's, nope, I can't change between gizmos. We're going to bring in a linear gizmo. And we're going to use this to control the global scale in the 3D viewport. So let's change this, since it's scale, to box. And primary color is fine. I don't want it to be RG or B. So let's just change the direction so that it doesn't overlap with any of the gizmos we already have on our transform gizmo. And we're just going to set all of the direction inputs to 1, so it just faces off that way. And when we combine all of this, there we go. When we combine all of this and we have this selected, there we go. We have our transforms and our global scale. And if we bring this up, the whole thing gets smaller, right? Just like when we affect this value here. So yeah, it's a little redundant, but I don't know. I'd like to have the controls available if we want it. And maybe we want to have, multiple textures and multiple control nodes, but we could bring in a value. Why did you do that? Oh, I must have hit B instead of V. Value node. Set that to 1, and then we can plug it into there, and now it controls both textures, just as an example. Anyway, those are basically all of our inputs. And yeah, let's just clean this up a little bit more. This isn't maybe the best way of organizing everything, but it'll be good enough for now. When I upload this, project file, I'll probably use the one that I've already made. So on Patreon, for my patrons at the paid tiers, you guys will have this node group available to you after the stream. I haven't uploaded it just yet, but I will. Anyway, so we have both of our gizmos. We have the combine, transform. Yeah, that should be everything. So now we can just kind of play around with some textures and see if we can get some interesting things going on. Oh, and one more thing. Let's label our node group. So this is going to be noise control. There we go. All right. I don't think I'm forgetting anything here. That should be everything. Yeah. There we go. And for the record, this can be used with more than just noise. Like, really, in all actuality, this is a space control. So we can use this to control the entire space, vector space. We're basically taking our position and transforming it with all of this so that our points can end up in different places. And it's a good way of controlling spaces, not just for our noise texture. I hope that makes sense. If you have questions, let me know. Anyway, so now we can take this and use it to combine our noise textures. We're gonna get rid of that. And of course, I made this before setting the defaults to be what they need to be, so that was all zeros. And like I said before, all zeros on scale, no geometry. Anyway, so let's see. I want to just do a quick demo before really getting into building up some art and like trying to have a solid direction to go in. We're just going to make some sedimentary rock, if that makes sense. We're gonna do like, imagine the Grand Canyon, right? And I can bring up a visual to show what I'm imagining in my head. So Grand Canyon. If I can spell, it would be great. Bring up some images. So maybe that's not exactly where I'm going, but I just want to be like, okay, we've got all of these different layers. I guess the layers are shown off here more as color, which we could definitely do. This would also work for textures, especially because, taking a look back in Blender, there's no geometry here, right? So this would work just as well in shaders. You could do all of this to control the noise for shaders and combine different noises. Yeah, there's no reason this has to be just in geometry nodes. And in fact, I might make one in shaders because I don't think, and let's test this out real quick. I don't think I can paste this in shaders. Well, helps if I make a new shader. Okay. Can I? Nope, I can't just paste that. So I'd have to remake this in shaders, but that's fine. This isn't honestly very hard. Oh, except it all hinges around Gizmo. So I think what we would have to do is save this vector space. Yeah, we could use a store named attribute node, and on here we could take this, plug it in, and say that that's the density. Or no, we could just take the vector, save it as a vector, name that like space, and then be able to use it in shader graph. I haven't tested that, and that's not really where I was going with this, so we're not going to do that right now unless you guys really want to. We can take a look at that in a second, but for now I want to show you guys more of the example that I have in my head. So taking a look again at Grand Canyon, or what's the flowing water. There's a canyon in Arizona that every time it floods, it changes its shape, like it gets eroded in different ways. I can't think of the name of it, but that's fine. I think let's just go with, we're not going to make exactly the Grand Canyon here, but we are going to make like these layers. I tried to make it bigger. I don't know if that actually worked for your end. But yeah, we're going to use some noise to create some layers and also warp the layers because I think that would look neat. So anyway, hopping back into Blender, let's kind of stretch things out here. So we're going to take this and just stretch it out on the X and the Y. I know I said those backwards. It's fine. And then we're going to compress on the Z to see all of these layers. And I know there are big gaps here. We'll address that in a minute. So, okay, let's maybe a little less on the Z, a little bit more on the X and the Y, so we get some pretty flat layers, but still a little bit of noise in there. Now, what we're going to do, let's see. Let's take this and let's just turn it on its side a little bit. Just get something. I'm imagining like the Grand Canyon is flat, but There are also regions in mountains where you can see all the sedimentary rock that then got uplifted and kind of turned on its side. And I always think that looks so cool. So let's go for something more like that. That's more of what I have in my head than the Grand Canyon. So we've got this uplifted and maybe a little less here. And something we could do is turn on normalize and then bring in the math node and compare like we had earlier, and just make it so that we can adjust kind of the thickness of each layer here. And there are lots of things we could do to really refine this as we go. We could bump up the number of voxels in our grid per axis. Yeah, I need to not get lost in the details, but it's fine. So let's do that. And I guess to show, before we really start getting into landscapes, I want to show one other thing that really makes this really awesome and really useful to give control. We're going to bring in another noise control, and instead of bringing in another noise texture, kind of like I was saying before, what we're going to do is actually use a mix node, and we're going to blend between two different vector spaces. And this is where we really get a lot of control. So let's make this B, we're gonna make this A. Of course, these all have the same parameters here. Let's plug that into our vector. Nothing's happened because these are the same space, right? But we need some factor to blend between them. And I guess before we bring in a procedural factor, let's just change these two vector spaces and warp between them manually for a moment so you guys can see where I'm going here. So let's just plug this in there real quick so we can get a different vector noise. Let's give it a different rotate, something a little more extreme. I think that looks pretty interesting. Now we can plug in our mix, and if we have this at 0, we're gonna go with this noise that we just made. And if we go with 1, we have this noise, and we can blend between the two, which is really neat. And it's even cooler if we bring in a gradient texture. There we go. And yeah, let's give it its own noise too, and reset all the default values here. Reset all default values. There we go. Plug this in. And if you're not familiar with the gradient texture, what it does is just give you a gradient from A to B. If if you use the factor, it's just going to be along the x-axis. If you do with a color, it'll be along all 3 axes. So for now, we're just going to go with the factor, and we're going to use that to blend between the two. So you can see where x is 0, there's a hard line here of one noise and the other noise. And then we have some fall off where x is positive. So using our noise control, we can offset that to be more in the center of our volume cube here. And then we can scale it up so we have a smoother transition. We can also change this from linear to maybe ease. Yeah, there we go. And now we don't have the hard line here. And now we've got a warp. So like, I imagine this is where we've had some, like an earthquake, or maybe a volcano has come and like pushed up all of the layers of sedimentary rock. So now they're all warped pretty steeply to be more vertical, right? That's kind of what's in my mind. And of course, this is linear noise. We could also bring in a noise texture and just reduce the scale. Use that factor. And that gets really interesting, but let's reduce the scale so we have it a lot smoother. And the reason I'm bringing that in is so that we have more control. It's not just, okay, left to right, we're transitioning. We can do it in all three axes now. So we could rotate that and it'll change how we warp between our noises. And I think for me, the biggest thing with this method is it was super easy to layer all of these different vector spaces and these two different kinds of noise together, right? Like that is pretty straightforward instead of having a million vector math nodes, kind of mixing them all together and playing with how the space would all like be adjusted for each one and adjusting all of the inputs here manually. Instead, we have A, gizmos, and B, this mix node can just be driven by another noise texture. And we're able to preserve all of these layers. Oftentimes, when I was playing around with this before, just using vector math nodes and noise textures, it'd be so hard to get layers and then get them preserved while also warping them. It was just difficult and tedious, and we saw that the last couple times I streamed. That's basically what we were doing, is just trying to play around with a million vector math noise, a million vector math nodes, and a bunch of different noise textures as inputs and outputs for each other. And now we just have nice, easy, simple ways of controlling and mixing, and I love it. It's so good. And if we go back to our gradient texture here, we have this, and our transformation got a little weird, but it's honestly what I wanted to show is that, yeah, we can also rotate this. So while it was going in the, along the X, let's actually reset there we go. So it's currently transitioning along the X, but we could use the Z rotation to change which direction it's transitioning along. So now it's more going along the Y axis. The only thing there is you have to keep in mind that we're not using any of these inputs to transform the gizmo itself. And I found whenever I tried to do that, it didn't work very well, in that it didn't remain very intuitive. So we just have to keep in mind that in order to transform this, translate this, we're still using the X inputs because we're using the X output of our gradient texture. Even though it's transforming along the Y-axis, we use the X arrow here. So that is basically what I have that's really new, and now we can kind of use this to start making some art, right? Start making some interesting landscapes. I really want to start making some interesting landscapes, but let's talk a little bit more about how to use this in a practical sense, because right now we're just looking at a bunch of layers, and this isn't very much like a terrain, right? We've got a bunch of huge gaps here, and that's just not anything. What we need to do is carve out some larger scale structures and then use this to define where we would see layers in the rock. So let's bring in a different noise texture, or I guess, yeah, let's just bring in this noise texture. We're going to turn off normalize, which means eventually we're going to get rid of this compare. But for right now, let's just use this to define our large scale structures in the environment. And it's still going to be a little bit arbitrary. So, if this doesn't look like the most realistic terrain, we're still kind of talking through the theory a little bit. And after we've talked through the theory, then let's pick out a landscape, probably one of the beaches I've been looking at in the last few streams, and we'll talk about how to make that terrain specifically. So let's use this noise texture, bring in our custom noise controls for it, and reset all of our values here. I need to, not tab. My keyboard is so messed up. Okay, so it says reset all to default values, and the hotkey is backspace. Not sure where to hit backspace in order to do that. Just thought I'd try and use the keyboard shortcut, but it didn't work exactly. Something to play around with later. Anyway, we have our noise controls, and let's see. I think, a little more No, I don't want all those floating bits. There's a way to get rid of floating bits of geometry that we can discuss later, but for now, I'm not going to worry about that. Instead, we're going to stretch this so it looks maybe a little less interesting, but it's easier to see, okay, we've got this rock face, right? And now we're going to add a bunch of layers, very visible layers where it's been eroded in spots and not so much in others. The way we're going to go about doing that is taking this, and this is where it does get a little bit tricky still, mixing all of the noises together. It's still difficult, but less difficult. So we're going to take this and let's see, let's just get rid of all of this for now. Not fully get rid of it, but we're just going to pull it off to the side. So it's a little easier to focus on what we're actually working on. So, okay, we're going to take this factor. Let's turn off normalize for a second so we can see, okay, these are what our layers look like. And basically we want to just kind of not add, but we're going to start doing some math to bring them together. So, okay, we've got more layers and more density here where our large scale structure, which let me just label that real quick so that we, it's easier to keep track of, right? So we've got our large scale and we've got layers. Okay. What we want is to say anything that's here is absolutely going to be there. We don't want to cut into it too much. Really, I want to add a little bit as it comes out of here. And yeah, it's this is rough. This is some rough geometry. We can fix that. It's just not going to be the focus for a hot minute. Let's see. How do we mix this together? I've done it a couple of times, but it's always finicky. I think what we're going to do is, since normalize is turned off here, we're going to use a compare node, and we're going to set it to, we're going to set it to 1. No, 0.5 was probably, yeah, even with normalize off? That's interesting. This is where it really turns into, okay, what do you think it's going to be? How does it actually turn out? What does it feel like? This is getting into the art of it, right? Anyway, we've got that. Now, maybe we need to subtract. It can be a little bit difficult. And in fact, you know what? To save myself some embarrassment, why don't we pull up another version of Blender that I've already done this in so I can reference my notes. I'll never be afraid to reference your notes. Okay. Give me just a hot second while I get this pulled up. Yeah, this one. Okay. How did I mix all of this together? Oh, okay. Okay. Yeah, this is a different way that I was trying to do before, and it doesn't work out quite as well. No, what we're going to do is bring in a multiply node, get rid of that, and this is going to look like anything for a minute, but stick with me here. We're going to multiply this with this. Why did I create another multiply node? So that we get some layers where it already exists, but it would be better if we added to this value. There we go. That's getting a lot closer. Okay. Yeah, and we just need some value to add in here. Leave that at 0.5 for a second, but we can see as we, yeah, there we go. We can use this to blend between the two. The only thing is, you know, if we add too much to this, we carve away a little bit more than I want, but that's kind of the general theory, very quick and dirty. Like, it needs a lot more refinement, but that's how we can just kind of pretty easily blend between these noises. I say easily. The mixing process is now where I struggle a little bit more, but we have so much control with our noises here, right? We don't have to do all the vector math to think about, okay, how do we transform the noise before even mixing them together? We can just mess around with the vectors. So let's do that just a little bit. Kind of play around. Oh, I'm playing around with the large scale. Let's get the layers, and this is why I labeled everything. Like, that's so easy to play around with now. And we can make up whatever story we want to if you're into geology. I am a little bit, just because I like thinking up terrain to then build on, think about, okay, what would grow here, what would live here, what buildings would you build here, what kind of culture can would thrive in this kind of an environment. That's kind of my headspace often when world building, which is something I want to get into talking about a little bit more on this channel, because now we have a very easy way of making terrain, and I want to ultimately start building up a world and building up a story, but uh, then use, Blender to make all the visuals for it. So that's kind of why we're doing this, or at least where my interest comes from. But man, that's so easy to play around with. And we can say, yeah, if there's like basically no rotation, we've just carved out a canyon, right? If there's some rotation, maybe this is more of a mountain, and like a lot of erosion has happened here, but we're going to end up, as we extrude along this plane, we'll get more jagged peaks and things like that. There's a lot of interesting geology out west in the US that has a lot of this sort of thing going on, like out in Utah, Arches National Park. So beautiful, so wild. It has a lot of erosion like this and a lot of interesting places where, yeah, volcanoes have come up and warped the terrain similar to this. Uh, maybe flattering myself a little too much, being like, oh yeah, this is how nature does it. Yeah, let's be a little more humble here, Gavin. Anyway, this is really cool, really fun. I'm excited to play around with this and figure out, okay, what do we need to do to make various kinds of landscape? Like maybe now this is a rock face, or heck, we could bring in maybe a Voronoi. Where is it? Voronoi texture. One of the things that we have here in the Pacific Northwest that I'd love to try and recreate is, let's bring up some Google Maps. The Cascade. Trying to think of what the region is called. Hood River Drive? I just want some images to be able to show what I'm talking about, because there's some interesting layering that goes on. Can't really see it, but that's kind of the large scale. You have mountains and then like cliffs along the Hood River. It would be so cool to recreate that. And then in these cliffs, I actually went on a hike recently. Man, do we not have any good images? I want to show you guys the rock faces because it's so beautiful. You have basically layers of basalt. So these big, huge, igneous crystal-like structures that break up the cliff face. It would be so cool to use some Voronoi to try and recreate that. I know the last couple times we were talking about making beaches, and that was part of the thumbnail for this one. And I would be happy to do that too. I'm just feeling inspired by my recent walk. Ooh. Or yeah, we just stick with beaches because, oh, the Oregon coast is so good. Like, look at that. You can see, I hope you guys can see, Oregon.com. Don't fail me now. You're not going to take me to the image? That's fine. It's fine. I just want to really blow up this image so you guys can see it, but I don't think it'll let me show it any bigger. Yeah. Sad, but it's fine. Anyway, I can see here all of these layers going all these different directions, and then how it's eroded, and we still have cliff faces and rocks in the water here. Like, that's kind of what I want to start getting more towards as we're building up landscapes and things. So, how do we go about doing that? And one thing I want to point out, the last couple of streams, and I know I keep referencing the last few streams, but this has been kind of the focus for a few weeks now. We've been kind of just offsetting a plane to create textures, or create terrains, and that's maybe not the best way to do it. Which is why today we're talking about volume cubes and really making volumes so that we get this 3D interpretation of these noise textures. What we really should do is, instead of making one plane for our terrain, we bring in maybe one plane for the ground, like the lowest level, and then we have rocks made out of this volume cube sort of thing, and then we have cliffs also probably out of a volume cube. But my point is, bring in lots of different objects to create those terrains instead of just a flat plane. That's making our lives a little bit harder and not really ever going to give us exactly what we want. So, now that we've gone through all of the theory and talked through all of this, why don't we resume kind of trying to make a terrain, and using both the methods that we developed the last couple of streams with just a plane and volume cube, and mixing all of our noise and using these noise controls to really layer everything together in an intuitive way. So, okay, let's see. How do we go about that? I think for now, so that this doesn't get lost, let's just create some new geometry. So, new plane, new geometry nodes. Let's bring in a volume cube, and yeah. Do we want to start off with a volume cube, or do we want to start off with more of the sand and like bring in a plane? I think for now, let's use a volume cube because that's kind of the headspace I'm in right now. So mesh to volume. Let's tie that all together. Oh, not mesh to volume. Volume to mesh. There we go. Okay. But I've been basically just working in the -1 to 1 range here. What we should do is probably up the amount of voxels we have. It's just dangerous because, of course, then we're doing so many more computations as the geometry gets bigger, right? So what would be a good range to play around with? Well, let's say that the minimum's going to be 0. That's like the base of our terrain for now. Then let's make our X and Y bigger. Let's go 5 and 5. So now we have a 10 by 10 cube. And yeah, let's make the height bigger, but like we're going to have a lot more horizontal. Like making a terrain, there's a lot more horizontal than there is vertical. In fact, let's even go 2.5. I'm trying to not just make a uniform cube if we're not going to use all of that, right? So let's do that. Then let's bump up the amount of resolution. I'm going to go a little crazy. Whoa. And bump it up to 128. So that's per length. And in fact, if our height is going to be half of what our width is, let's just do a little bit of integer math to make sure that everything's uniform, because right now we're going to have twice as many voxels on the Z than we do have on the X and the Y. And let's not do that. Instead, we're going to take an integer, just give it a input node so that it's easy to tell what our inputs actually are. We're going to take this up to 128, and then we're going to divide this by 2. So 128 is going to be our X and our Y. And 64 essentially is going to be our Z. And now we just have one control to kind of, control our overall resolution. If I was smart, I'd also tie that into our probably max vector so that we can keep our proportion of half the Z, or even be able to change the proportion on the fly. But that's a little bit much for right now. I'd rather get into playing around with our noise. So let's get in a noise control. Let's get in a noise texture. And let's start going. By the way, if anyone's curious, like, stop me if you want me to explain anything or whatnot. We went through making the noise control pretty quickly early on in the stream. And if you've joined since then, let me know if you have questions here on how this works or just want to take a look at it. But let's plug this in and turn off normalize so we can see what we're doing. I think what we want to do is kind of define the large scale structures first. So where do we have a beach versus cliffs versus, all of the large structures that we would have in this sort of a terrain. So I guess let's turn down the scale to 1. I like to leave scale at 1 on this, and then we can use our global scale over here. Bring up our noise control and just, let's turn down our global scale by quite a bit. And I think let's stretch it on the Z, because I don't want to have too many floating bits of geometry if we can avoid it. And then we'll stretch it on the Y or the X. I think the X. Well, let's just play around with it, right? So, okay. That's interesting. Let's find... Ooh, that looks neat to me. Let's stretch this a little bit more. We've got an interesting overhang and some cliffs here. So let's play around with the Z a little bit. See if we can... Do we want the overhang or do we want a receding cliff? Ooh, and now that's neat too. Of course, we can bring in more noise to kind of control exactly where we do and don't have land and whatnot, and adjust the overall height. I'm just going for big structures right now. Big structures for our terrain. Like, for example, let's actually bring in a... not linear. I want a gradient texture. And why don't we define... like this noise we're going to use to define cliffs. So let's label it as cliffs. Cool. Now, maybe we bring in another noise texture to... not noise... well, we'll need noise control. That's fine. Another noise texture to control some of the rocks down at the bottom of the cliff, or even the, like the sand, the ground just at the base. So let's plug this in, turn off normalize. It's easier if we just don't have normalize. Plug that in, and of course we're going to need to adjust the overall scale of everything, really bring that down. Let's just drag the offset way off real quick in a random direction. Actually, hold on. Instead of doing that, no. We're going to turn off our translation and use this vector input. Random value. Nice. And we can say -100, 100. And this is going to give us something really wild for a second. So hold on. Just hold on to your butts for a hot second. No, okay, that isn't as wild. Reason I said that is because I was thinking it would give us a different vector for every single voxel, and it would basically turn into white noise because In my mind, random value is a white noise. Every input gets a completely different value. There's no uniformity to it. There's no relationship between one voxel and another. But it didn't do that. I guess it just decided that our voxel cube is one input. I don't know, that's kind of wild to me. Like, if we had just plugged this into our vector, yeah, it kind of goes haywire. But okay, anyway, sorry, I don't know. I expected something different. It didn't do that. C'est la vie. Anyway, we have a random vector here so that we don't have to have our translation be really crazy, and we can have a new input, basically, for our noise texture that is different from this one. And without having to invoke 4D and have a W vector, or W value. So anyway, we've got that. Let's turn the scale down to 1, I think, which means we're going to bring up our global scale some, but not that much. Bring this down a little bit more. A lot a bit more. Well, not to negative. There we go. Something more like that. And now we can just start messing around with this. Get... Not that. I don't want that. Almost want to be able to see these mixed together. So let's add those and then translate part of it. Only problem is we need this to have a floor. So let's put that at a maximum of 0. There we go. So now we have those structures that we were seeing a minute ago. And we can use this to just offset, yeah, what I was saying would be the rocks, but we still have to transform the space to actually get what I've got in my head. And maybe we should take a look at our reference real quick. So I was thinking something like this, where we've got, you know, big cliffs, big structures, lots of rocks. And we'll bring in layers and rotate the space in a minute. I just want to kind of figure out what the scale would be of all the different rocks. So let's see. Maybe we want some more scale so it's a lot smaller detail. And what we could do is bring in another add node and turn that down so that we can control the amount that we have. Oh, but we're doing that with our cliffs. Hold on. That's not what we want to do. Hold on. 0.3. I want to make sure that we keep all of this. So I guess that means we have to bring in another math node and a value node just to maintain the offset here. So let's multiply by -1. Feed this in. We'll set this to 0.3 so that this is negative, but that is positive, and we have the same offset so that we can control just the offset of... No, that doesn't work. Why did it work before? That's fine. Sometimes I think I know what I'm doing, and then Blender says no. No, actually, it doesn't work like that. But that's fine. Okay, we are maintaining the major structures, but not when I adjust this. That's right. Okay. You know what? We're gonna turn this back down. Yeah, it's interesting that when I adjusted those by hand, it did what I expected it to. But when we adjusted it procedurally, it didn't. Very interesting, but that's fine. That's not the focus at the moment. Right now, I just want to get some rocks in. So I think what we need to do is mix this with a gradient so that we can have lots of rocks down here and none up here, right? So let's get a gradient. We could multiply these, I'm thinking. Take this and that, multiply it so that as we go up, we get less stuff. Right now, you know, nothing on the X over here. Lots of stuff on the X over here for this layer. But we want to rotate this. Nope, we need fresh controls. There we go. We need to rotate our X the other way so that shouldn't be 180. That should be like 90. Nope, 90 the other way. It's doing it here, but I want it to go the other direction. I want it to be solid at the bottom and then fade to nothing at the top. So we got to rotate it the other way around. There we go. There we go. And right now it's cutting out of the cliffs too. I don't really want that. So let's make sure that we're doing the floor before, or multiplying, sorry, before we do the floor. That's getting closer. Still not quite it. I might have to just not talk for a hot second while I'm thinking about how to best go about this. Yeah, because we're getting all of those rocks in at the bottom. That's starting to look in the right direction. It's still not there. Starting to get into the right direction, though. Now, I'm curious, since this is controlling the space for the gradients, it's interesting that it's controlling it for the Z, along the Z. Guess, yeah, our rotation's not quite what I thought it was. Hold on. This is getting wonky. Why does it feel so wonky? Maybe we do just want to look at this noise for a hot second. Get rid of the cliffs. Oh, it's probably because these noises are doing different things. I don't know. This is where it gets tricky, you know? It does look like our gradient is doing something, just not quite what I thought it would be doing. Like, I want it to cut off at the top and just none of this geometry be there. I just want this geometry here at the bottom. So why are you doing it like that? Oh, okay. Turning on easing works. Surely that's not... Okay. I think we need to adjust the scale. Or even bring in a maximum? Another maximum to cut off the top here? Hard to tell. Yeah, that'll do. Yeah, it probably was bringing in some negative values, which then brought it... Yeah, it's just one of those things where you got to play around with it. Like, I've added more intuitive controls, but there's still just some playing around that needs to be done. Anyway, so those are our rocks, so I'm pretty happy with that. Let's bring in our add so that we get our cliffs back in. Fantastic. And now we can just use the noise control here to bring the rocks out some. Yeah, that's looking interesting. I like how this kind of lines up with this. Yeah, that's okay. That's starting to look neat. I like it. Just a little bit more fiddling. I like it. I like it a lot. But can I be dangerous and bring in another gradient to mix with so that we have more? Yeah, no, we're going to leave that be for a hot minute. I want to play around with this boundary here and make it so that that gets cut off some, but we could honestly rotate like the entire thing. Ooh, like actually, let's bring in another noise control and reset all of the, there we go, reset all of our values here. And what we can do is bring in a vector math noise for this one, vector math node for this one, and we're going to add this vector space. I think because we just added that in, it's going to, well, no, that shouldn't have done that. That should not have done that. Interesting. Very interesting. Like all of these are reset. And if we just add in, can I just turn this global scale back, like down a little bit more? There we go. Okay, that's close to what we had a second ago. Ooh, that's almost better? Question mark? Not quite. But we can just continue to... Oh, I grabbed the wrong scale. I want to grab the global scale here. Get it closer to what we had a second ago, because I liked that. Dang it. Yeah, that's fine. We can play around with it more in a second. I want to explain what I'm doing with this because I haven't explained that very well. So what I'm thinking is we could plug this into all of our noise, but why is it offsetting it so much? This should basically just output the position because we haven't adjusted any of these inputs whatsoever. I mean, it's fine. It's just annoying. But my goal here is to then have a master control so that we can select this one and then offset like the entire world. And that works pretty well. I probably just should have done that at the beginning so that we were playing with that to begin with, but I just thought about it, so it's fine. It's annoying, but it's fine. Oh, and I guess because all of these have normalize turned off, that's why it's cutting out some of the other layers, and I don't really want that, so why don't we bring in another maximum set to 0? So now it shouldn't cut out any of the other layers when we adjust this. Yeah, there we go, okay. That's better. That's better. I think that's the way to go about it, is anytime we have a noise texture, it's nice to have normalize off, but at the same time, we should have it clamped to the 0 to 1 space. Yeah, that's a lot better. Okay. Nope, wrong one. Yeah, I might have to take another second to label everything. Oh, that's looking so interesting. It's not really what I was going for, but it's so interesting. Like, could we rotate this to... I want to just fill that gap. Bring this in. Oh, that's so interesting. But I want that gap to get filled. How do we get you to do that? I could bring in more noise to just force it to be filled, but I don't really want to do it like that. Let's stretch out the X some more because... And now I've completely lost the original shape we had, but that's fine. This is just interesting to play around with, you know? Nah, let's reset that a little bit. Yeah, and maybe we just pull in another bit of noise or, you know, draw in some filler there so it gets filled in. But we have some interesting large-scale cliff structures. We have some interesting rocks here. We could even bring up the rocks a little bit. Like, add a little bit more to it. Yeah, something like that. Kind of want to rotate it so we have a little more of a... Ooh, that's touchy. It's fine, but ooh. There we go. Something like that. Might even want to pull the cliffs back just a little bit now so that we have more open space here towards the front. Oh yeah, that's starting to look pretty neat. To me, I'm visualizing like what this is going to look like towards the end in my head, because again, we're just playing with large-scale structures and trying to get something that'll look neat. Da, da, da. But I could probably just fiddle with all of this all day. So why don't we give it a few more seconds and then we'll get some more layers mixed in here. And of course, this is all procedural, so we can naturally continue to play with this. Like, we can add in more layers and then adjust some of our base layers in a minute. That's interesting. Okay. I think what I want to do now is bring in maybe just a gradient texture and reset our controls. Okay. And what I want to do is establish kind of where the sand is. Just get a base layer in where we have some gradient. And this is maybe where we even have the grid extend a little below the ground plane so that we could have some space under here for like just a little bit more space for sand and the more beachy area. Anyway, let's get this mixed in, and we need to label some of this stuff. Otherwise, it's going to get so confusing so quickly. Okay, global transforms. Okay. We've got random offset. And that's random offset for what? For the rocks. Random rocks offset. Okay. Let's label this as our rocks, right? Because that's what we've got going on here. Rocks. We have cliffs. We have some mixing going on. You know, I'm going to drag the maximum node into each of these sections so that we remember that, yeah, that is determining things specifically for here. That is bringing all of our negative values up to 0. So now we're going to get these controls, bring this in, and what was this? This was rotating our, yeah, creating a limiter for our noise, for our rock noise. So let's call that just rock gradient. Yeah, I think that works. Okay. Let's do that. Now this is going to become our base sand. Cool. Okay. I think that's everything at least reasonably labeled now. And we've dropped that down just a little bit, which means our resolution is going to get a little weird, but that's fine. We can play with that in a minute, get that fixed up and whatnot. So, okay, I think what I want to do is bring in... Well, no, let's handle the sand first before I start bringing in even more layers and all of that. Although I say that and immediately I'm like, but I want to bring this down just a skosh. I want more cliff face there. Cool. Starting to look very interesting. We could maybe even just use a gradient to help fill this in. But, like I said, getting ahead of myself. Let's do the thing that we talked about here in just a second ago. So, bring in a maximum for this gradient texture. Maximum of 0. Let's use this for the density for a second to see what we're doing here. And okay. We're definitely going to use some easing. And let's bring that over this way. Rotate it that way, rotate, maybe not rotate it quite in that order. Let's rotate it on the Z first. So Z is going to be -90. Then on the X, can we rotate it now? No, I think we got to rotate it on the Y to get that kind of wedge of sand that I'm imagining. I keep adjusting the X. I forget it's the Y that we need to play around with here. And of course we can now just bring this up or down. That is so nice. These are such nice controls. So, okay. We've got that. Now let's bring in... How do we want to add this together? Let's just try and add real quick. Yeah, there we go. Okay. We'll probably want a minimum node here somewhere. Probably multiple minimum nodes to make sure that we're not going over 1. Right now, that's not a big deal, but I could see that causing issues in the future. Anyway, let's bring that down maybe so we can still see our rocks. Nah, I think that's looking pretty good. If anything, we should bring our rocks up. And oh man, this is so much nicer than the last couple of streams where trying to mix everything together and come up with multiple noise textures. It was such a struggle, and now it's only been an hour and a half. We've not only talked through how to make the noise controls and the theory and showed some examples and whatnot, we're also making good strides on an interesting terrain. It's still rough. I go back and forth on whether or not I like this. I think it'll look more interesting when we bring in some detail. But all of that aside, this is becoming much easier to play around with. And because of how we've mixed it together, we can just kind of mess around with our layers independently, which is so cool. It's very cool. I'm very happy about it. Like, that's interesting. That's very interesting. And I might just play around with the different controls every now and again because, like, there's a lot that can be adjusted, and I love seeing new, fresh versions of what we've made. But okay. Let's... Oh, yeah, like that. Like, we've got this coming in. I still don't love that gap, but it's starting to look a little bit better. Or maybe it's just growing on me. Who's to say? Anyway, let's bring up our rocks a little bit more, I think. Maybe even transform those some so that we get some more interesting shapes. I'm not sure. I don't know. It's going to be hard to say whether or not I'm happy with all of these layers until we've got more detail in, I think. So let's keep bringing in some detail. And before we do that, why don't we take a look at our reference here? So, yeah, I think that's kind of what we're missing. All of these rocks have these layers, right? They're all being added and giving it direction and shape. So we need to bring in some layers. Let's do that. And I think the layers should affect both the cliffs and the rocks. Like, these are giving us the large scale shapes, but the layers should be seen through all of it. So let's actually reference our first plane here because... Why did I do that? We have this basically set up here, which is why I didn't really want to get rid of this, because we already have some noise that does some nice layers. So we can just copy that, go into our other set of geometry nodes and paste them in. Now let's grab that and just plug that straight into density for a second. See what we've got here. Okay. I think we should transform this so that all of the layers point... I want them to point this way. So how do we get this to do that? There we go, okay. Now they're all pointing that way. Let's maybe rotate them so they're not as drastic. They're a little bit more horizontal, but I want some interesting directionality with them. They shouldn't all just be flat, you know? So let's rotate that like that. I'd also like to maybe warp this some. Kind of like how we showed before. So let's bring in our other noise control and get in a mix. Get a mix in the mix, as it were. So let's bring in this vector. Let's bring in that vector. Plug that into our noise. Of course, it's not going to do anything for a hot second because these are the same noise value. And I want another noise. Before we did kind of both using a noise and a gradient texture to drive the factor of this mix. I think I want a noise this time so that it's not just left to right controlling the gradient. Yeah, so let's get in some more controls. Delete all of our inputs. Use that. Okay. Now let's give this a different look. Oh boy. Oh boy, oh boy. Okay, hold on a second. We're just going to look at this vector for a moment because this is what we initially have. This is the other vector that we want. So let's have it warp. Like, I want them to have kind of the same general direction, but one to be more extreme and the other to be less extreme. How do we... sorry, so I just saw your message. I don't know when that came in, but you like this method? Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'm having a lot of fun. I hope you are too. So yeah, let's get this more extreme angle going. Yeah. Now we can get the noise texture, but I want it to be a very small noise. Like, I effectively want it to look like the gradient texture, but less linear. So let's plug in our mix, and of course it's going to be all kinds of wonky. So let's take our global scale and turn it down to like 0.1. There we go. Oh, and this needs to be normalized since this is going to drive the mix, the factor of the mix. It needs to be 0 to 1. So let's keep it in the 0 to 1. And let's see. Let's see. How much is this controlling it? How much is this warping it? Not quite as much as I had expected. So, oh, maybe I kept the noises kind of too similar almost? Let's actually plug the factor of our mix noise in just so we can see. Okay. Let's stretch this out so that I don't want it to be linear like the gradient noise is, but I don't want a lot of small places where it's really quickly changing between the two different noise textures. So let's just scale this down, scale it way down. Let's scale that down by a factor of 10. I moved the decimal the wrong direction. Hold on. Okay, there we go. But we need to, offset this way. Maybe rotate that to be more interesting. I have no idea how this is going to end up exactly. So let's switch back to the factor for our noise. That's interesting, but again, maybe I'm just not... There's maybe just not enough difference between these two. So let's make this one more extreme and have it go more... just not align with the initial noise, right? So that's a lot more extreme, I think. Plug this in, and okay, we've got that warp going on. Perhaps the scale is just not agreeing. And maybe I'm just overthinking this, right? Let's see. Yeah, that's okay. That's starting to get more interesting. Could maybe turn up the scale here so that... No, I like those very gradual warps back and forth between our two different noises. I think that'll look very interesting when we go to apply that to both our rocks and our cliffs. Okay. So let's relabel this because we'll call it rock layers because we've got all these different layers. So layers feels far too generic to me. So we'll have that. Now we need to mix that with this. Okay, so if we just bring in an add node, it's not going to work very well. Let me take a look. What did we do? Right, we multiplied. So let's multiply these together. And we'll have to tweak as we go. But we can take this multiplied by this. And that should get... Okay, we've got the general shape. If we turn on normalize now, that is cool. It still looks ugly. But that looks really cool. Oh, and as we continue to play with this, it's gonna just get cooler and cooler. So I think this would be maybe a good time to talk about like smoothing out all of those uh, jagged corners in our geometry, because of course these are voxels, and it's just interpolating, okay, what value at this voxel should be inside or outside of the mesh. So it's pretty harsh when we have such small detail going on here. So how do we go about fixing that? Let's add in the easiest thing we could possibly do, set shade smooth. That'll help out a little bit. Something that I've found can help, but should be used with a grain of salt, is the blur attribute, and we're just going to blur out our position. Plug that in, set position, and we'll, since we're starting off with position, we're going to plug this straight into position. So now we can turn up our iterations, and it smooths things out, but where we have the most, where the transition is the sharpest on all of these noises, we're still going to have a lot of weird, jagged stuff, and I haven't figured out the best way to smooth that out. Honestly, it would probably be just to increase our resolution and increase our iterations on our blur attributes, or even to separate all of these noises out into different pieces of geometry so that you can have different amounts of resolution for each one, which is something that I did mention before, that we should probably have multiple pieces of geometry and not just one major piece that is our entire terrain. So yeah. Right now I'm just having a fun time blending between all of these different kinds of noise. And it should be said that maybe not all of the terrain here should have all of these layers. Like we could have some layers and then maybe bring in where it's a larger piece of a different kind of rock, that like a big lava flow came in and kind of just added a huge mass over top of some of these layers. We could do that. Just trying to think, how can we make this more interesting and more clearly a beach? Because I'm struggling with like levels of detail a little bit. Like it feels like these smaller structures here where it's supposed to be more of the rock, which we could honestly bring more in. It feels like we should have higher resolution on those than on the cliff faces. Which, yeah, why don't we bring in more cliff? Bump that up just a little bit. Or even move it off towards the side here. I just want to get rid of the holes that were getting cut into that side. And now that we've eaten away some at this, why don't we squish it some on the Y here, and then bring it in. I'm just still trying to get rid of this pass that's been cut through here. I don't love it. I want there to be a wall there. Dang it. That's fine. It's getting more and more interesting, and I love this version of playing with all of these noises, right? Layering them in. It's so nice. I think you can lower the resolution and use sub D, yeah, node to smooth it. Yeah, I hesitate with subdivision though, because that's so heavy, you know, because we're going to basically quadruple. Is it quadruple? We'll be multiplying the amount of geometry we have, which can get dangerous. But yeah, why don't we try that real quick? Let's drop this in half, because I like to stick with powers of 2. That's maybe dropped down a little too much. Although that is starting to, that looks really neat. Yeah, I think the resolution was too high, and maybe like if this is a terrain, we would probably be zoomed in real close on things going on like in the center of the terrain. So we could have all of that be at a high resolution, right? And then this would all be in the be a lower resolution since it's in the background. That's also starting to look weird, but it's fine. Anyway, yeah, let's try doing some subdivision surface and save our progress because I haven't done that yet. So bad at saving consistently. Some days I save every 2 seconds, it feels like, and some days I'll go for a couple of hours, which is a problem. Anyway, we've got one level of subdivision. 2, 3. Oh, should I should probably. I mean, it's set shade smooth, but it feels like shade smooth should be at the end always, in my opinion. I don't think it really matters that much, but it feels right. My habit is to have set shade smooth be at the very end of the geometry nodes. Anyway, we've got a couple of subdivisions. How much geometry do we have? Real quick, I want to take a look. Oh, 1.4 million vertices. It's fine. It's fine. Why don't I close the other blender that I have up? Just so that we can, you know, save my computer a little bit. Streaming and listening to music and playing with over 1 million vertices. I'm sure my computer would like it if I took it a little easier, but it's fine. Everything's fine. Anyway, that's starting to look really interesting. Just trying to think, what else could we do? Like, we've kind of lost all of the rock detail. I'd like to bring that in. Also, I'm upset. These little corners are still so annoying. But it's fine. Maybe we could do a set position after the subdivide surface. Oh yeah, because blurring that out is doing a lot of work. Let's actually set that to 0, see how it looks without blurring all of our positions. And now if we turn up subdivisions. Interesting. Ooh, one too many. One too many, I think. Yeah. Yeah, let's turn that down. And we don't need that many, because if we have one subdivision, we're at 90,000 vertices. No subdivisions, we're at 22.5. So yeah, we're rapidly increasing the amount of subdivisions with very little payoff. With 2 levels, there's not a ton of difference between 1 and 2. 0 and 1 helps. So one level I think is pretty good. And I think that's not too unreasonable. Let's now also, you know, blur our positions some. I think that helps some, but yeah, it's just so difficult to get rid of all of those little corners. So that's something I think I'll definitely have to play around with and see if I can figure out next time. Well, hopefully for next time or just in the future. But for right now, let's continue to play around with these large-scale shapes and bring in the rocks and all of that stuff. Because, like, that's interesting, but not really what I was going for. Oh, yeah. We could switch these back around. I forget when that happened. Oh, and that's cool. Hold on. I love that. Where this is all very horizontal, but then on this side of the beach, it gets much more vertical. Oh, that's so good. Oh, that's good. Okay, I love that. Let's play with the cliffs just a little bit so that we can bring in more volume here. You know what? Actually, hold on. We're going to turn off both of these nodes while we're playing with the large scale everything, because that's just going to add so much to it. I'm fairly new to Blender. I know the basics, which I used to make the mod drift track for games. I saw this creator, Mesh House, use the geometry node to create a road generator tool that aligns and adjusts with the terrain when he moves the road. How would I go about setting up something like that? Great question. Give me a hot second, A, to think about it, and B, like, that's not exactly what we're doing today. That is something I want to do, though. So it's just a question of, do we do that here in a little bit? If not, I can definitely, like, talk you through it. I just need a hot second to think, you know? So road generator aligns and adjusts with the terrain when you move the road. Yeah, so you're talking about getting the road to fit to the terrain, or are you talking about getting the terrain to adjust to where the road is, or a mix of both? Because both are perfectly possible. It's just what do we want to do with that, you know? Also got to remember to drink some water because it's been a couple of hours of just talking. But yeah, let me know. He showed a preview on his channel. I see. I mean, I'll check it out a little bit later. For right now, I kind of just want to focus on this. But yeah, what you could do to kind of answer your question real quick, maybe you could limit the blur node to work only on a specific angle. That's a good idea, and we'll talk about that here in a hot second. See what we could do. But yeah, to get the road without really getting into it, you should check out the is it ray trace or raycast? Raycast, I think. I know it's Raycast. There we go. Yeah. Check out this node. It's super good. It'll let you get an attribute from a target geometry. So you can use that to like get the normal of the terrain where the road is, and then like tilt the curve. I'm assuming you're going to use a curve for your road. Use the normal to adjust to the curve of the road, which is difficult. But you should be able to figure that out. There's a creator, what's his name? Just look for like tilt curve. That'll get you pretty far as like getting your road to adjust with the terrain. And if you want the terrain to adjust to the road, kind of do the same thing, but in the reverse direction. I hope that makes sense, and we can talk about that more. It's just not quite germane to this stream at the moment. Great question, though, and I love thinking through that. Terrain aligned to road position. Okay, yeah. What you would want to do is take all of the points on your terrain, use the raycast to shoot up, and then have your road above that. And where they hit the road, or not even above that, just wherever you want your road. And then wherever it hits the road, use that position, which it'll give you the hit position. Use that to then set your position. I hope that helps. And that'll probably be another stream. I just don't want to get into that today because that's not quite where we're at with this project. And I don't want to do a whole side tangent right now. But great question. I love that is actually something that I love thinking through, is how would you put roads on things, and how does that adjust? Which way does it adjust? You know, because you can either have the road adjust to the terrain or the terrain adjust to the road. Just about to watch some of your Geometry Nodes videos to learn how to use Geometry Nodes, but I saw you live. Well, thank you for joining. Welcome. I hope you have fun. And yeah, check out some of my videos. There's a lot out there, and working on more videos to, talk about how to learn Geometry Nodes. That's something that I want to do here soon. And we're going to be talking about terrains, because that's what we've been doing on stream for a while, and I'm really excited to talk about a bigger project that I have going on that's going to need a lot of terrain and a lot of noise textures. Anyway, so yeah, let's. I want to adjust some of these structures, and then we'll take a look at limiting the blur node to work with only specific angles, because that's honestly a great question. That's a great question and a great thought. Because yeah, we can use the weight. I was just thinking, like, do we have a selection input? But we don't have a selection input here. We have a weight input, so we could blur based on the angle of the curve. Oh, that's a good idea. That's a really good idea, because then we could crank up the number of iterations where it gets really sharp. Okay, I said I was going to play around with the terrain. Hold on, I want to address this, because this is that's an interesting question. And how would we do that? Because that would fix a lot of what's going wrong with this terrain at the moment. I think what we can do is get an edge angle. Yeah. I just want to take a look. Edge vertices. I thought I saw something that might have also worked. But okay, edge angle. I want to say that would be a good way to do this. Like, we want to figure out how sharp each of the corners are, right? How sharp all of the all of the vertices are. And based on that, smooth out the ones that are real sharp and not so much the ones that are pretty flat. Oh, that's a great question. I gotta think for a hot second. Because I want to use edge angle. The problem is that exists on the edge domain, which is fine because we can cast from edge to point. But is that the best way to do it? Is that the most efficient way to do it? Well, regardless about efficiency, well, I guess no. Thinking about efficiency, we would definitely use the unsigned angle, because I don't see any reason to worry about concavity, which is what you would use the signed angle for, and that's heavier to compute. And I do want to keep that in mind with how many vertices we have. Yeah, can we just use that as the weight? Like, let's real quick think through mapping this, because the weight here, I don't think we can type in. We can type in something above 1, but I think it would be better to keep it in the 0 to 1 range. So let's take the unsigned angle. It would go from 0 to pi or 0 to tau. Let's try pi first, and then map that to 0 to 1, and then let's plug that into weight. Turn on our set position. Does that seem to do anything? Okay. It's almost looks like it's smoothing out the flat spaces more, so why don't we invert that? Yeah, that's what my intuition says, is to use edge angle, but I might have to investigate that more later, just because I'm sure there's something that I'm not quite remembering at the moment. So great question, and I'm gonna check that out. For now, let's just keep playing around with the spaces, because like I'm having fun with that. I'm having so much fun, and if it doesn't look the most beautiful, if it doesn't look perfect at the end of the stream, I'm okay with that, because this is probably still not going to be quite a finished product. But there's been a lot of progress that I'm really happy to see, you know? So, okay, I want to get rid of this break, and I feel like the best way to do that would be to scale. But of course, because we have rotation, it's going to rotate everything as we scale, huh? That looks so cool. I'm just happy with how neat this looks with all of the different layers in here, you know? That's so good. And honestly, you know what? Something like this, if we could get this structure to be to like stand on its own, it would be neat to have that maybe as like a C stack. I wish I could take features and just move them around independently, but that's not how this works. Yeah, if we could maybe turn down the scale of this or up the scale, make it so that the layers are thicker. So that has more connection. Oh, no. I'm adjusting the noise that's mixing between the two. There's also the selection socket in the set position. Oh, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. So we could 0 to 1 compare. We could use comparison to get that as a Boolean. And we'll say that if it's greater than 0.5, so that's if the angle of the point is greater than 90, that should work. That should work, or at least we can try it out, right? And we can easily flip this to see if we're even doing it the right direction. Okay. I think because that's preserving more of the flat detail, I think that's the direction we want to go. I'm just gonna fiddle around with some values and not really think about what they mean for a second to see if we can, ooh, that's interesting. Yeah, like I can think about, okay, what do these values do? But sometimes it's nice to, it's fun to just kind of go no thoughts, head empty. Let's just mess with some numbers for a minute. And this is interesting. It's super ugly, but it's interesting. Yeah, this way, it's definitely adjusting that more than that. Also a reason to just mess with numbers and not think about it too much. Sometimes you can get more extreme results when you're not overthinking it, and it becomes clearer what's actually going on. So that is really nice. I don't know, is that better or worse? There's almost no difference. Cool. That is a great point. Again, I'll probably play around with it later. Thanks for pointing that out because just another option. Oh, I had wait turned on for that. Hold on. Okay, almost no difference. Great thoughts. I will play around with it later. So I'm sorry you won't get to see that progress right this minute. And keep throwing those ideas at me. I'm okay bouncing back and forth a little bit. It's just I don't want to spend a ton of time when I'm not sure how much progress it'll get. But I really do appreciate the ideas and the feedback. Thank you. So okay, let's bring in some more rocks. That's definitely what I've been missing. Is we had a lot of detail here, and now it's kind of gotten lost. So let's bring this in, but I think we need to move it forward. Yeah, that's looking interesting. But it's hard to tell because we have so many gradients that are like getting it to disappear down that way. So let's take this gradient that's turning off, like controlling where the rocks are and aren't. And let's just fiddle around with it a little bit more. Because, yeah, that was set to negative. Okay, we've brought up the rocks. Oh, yeah, there we go. Okay, that's starting to look a little more interesting. And we're playing with the noise control for the gradient. So let's play with the rocks and get those pulled back here. and then rotate the gradient so that, whew, wrong axis. Yeah, the angle, some of these controls get weird on the for just a gradient texture, which is annoying because I want those intuitive controls, right? I keep saying I want these to be intuitive, but unfortunately with the gradient texture, it's not quite intuitive. Not yet, anyway. Oh, that's good. Ooh, I like that. Okay. Okay. Okay, we've got cliff here, and then it flattens out, and then we've got more of a drop off. That looks really neat. Still don't love this. I don't think those layers would work like that in real life. Now it looks so cool. Thank you. I hope you mean now, and the delay didn't. It wasn't earlier that you liked it. I hope you like this, but oh, that's looking so cool. I really just don't like this. Is there... What can we do? What can we do to get rid of that? Like, I liked the idea that it was a C stack, but... Ooh? Oh? Nah. That's not that great. Let's see if we can just find maybe a different position that's similar, but not quite as wonky. And try not to do too much before I run out of undos, right? Yeah. Okay. Oh? Maybe. Maybe that'll do it. Still a little weird, but it's interesting. We've got some overhangs. Not sure that I'm sold on that just yet. Oh? If we could just... Yeah, okay, that's separated. We've got a lot of little floating bits here, but that's okay. I have a method for getting rid of that. And I should probably show that off some too. Let's bring the rocks down just a touch. Let's compress the rocks and then bring them down because I don't want to lose. No. I just want to create a little bit more space here. Like right here, I want to create a little more space, but maybe I'm not going to get that without really messing with it. And I like this overall shape. So I should probably stop playing with it. Okay. Now, there's one more thing I want to do for the overall shape of the terrain. I don't love that it's flat at the top, right? So I want to bring in some noise to kind of compress the whole thing, but with some noise. So we just get a little bit of intrigue at the top of the cliff. Like I'm thinking that space should be pretty flat, but not perfectly flat. So one more layer here, and then I think we're gonna call it good. As far as the overall shape, there's a lot that needs to be worked on, but I like the overall shape. So in future streams, we'll come back to this geometry and refine it instead of continuing to create new methods of making terrains, right? Because I love this. I think this is a pretty good workflow. It feels right, you know? This feels like a good way to create these different noise layers and mix them together. And it's getting something that's far more interesting than what we were getting in the last couple of streams. So, anyway, enough of a ramble. Let's actually do that. So we've got this. Ooh, which I should say, hold on. We've got sand. That, I think, should be independent of the layer noise, right? The rock layers. That should be its own thing. How do we get that to be its own thing and not actually have any of these layers here at the bottom? Ooh, that's a big detail that I shouldn't neglect. Let's see. I think what we'll do is a comparison so that we have a 0 to 1. Not that kind of comparison. We need a math comparison. So we have, let me zoom in so I can actually read the menu. We need to compare. And let's plug this into our density real quick so we can see whether or not it's doing it correctly. Okay, there's that. Oh, and I guess some of the lines here are going to be just because we've rotated in voxels and all of that. So that'll definitely need some smoothing out. I think that might help. Of course, we're using selection. Yeah, it'll get smoothed out eventually. And all of this will need some work. That's fine. For now, I just want to make sure that this is relatively smooth and we're not getting all of the rock layers. No, that looks pretty smooth, actually. But if we brought in more detail for all of the rocks and things, like if we had detail here and not so much there, that would be great. So we need some value to say, okay, this is supposed to be sand versus rock. How do we come up with that value? We should be able to use it for the compare. And then if we multiply, instead of adding this together, let's get rid of that. Do this. So now we've got all of the rocks with all of the layers. And then can we take this comparison and... Oh, this is not going to work the way I expect it to. Yeah, this is not going to work the way I think it should. We're going to want to add. After the multiply, we'll add. That's what we're going to do. Okay. And that should give us... Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty good. Like I said, all of these lines here are from the voxels. So when we do smooth out our terrain... And yes, I see that it's cutting in here. We can adjust that here in a second. The sand. Oh, you separate geo with comparing on the z-axis to separate the sand. That's it. Separate geo with comparison on the z. Yeah. I mean, yeah. So, like, you're saying split it into two different sets of geometry, which... is something I was saying before. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. Instead of doing separate, though, what we're going to do is... And sorry, it took me a second to just think through that, but you are absolutely right. What we're going to do is instead of separate, we're going to duplicate this. And this will make sense in a hot second, I promise, because now we can join geometry. And take a look at that. We've got all of the detail in the rocks. This is pretty smooth. Hold on. Oh, okay. We're going to use this. There we go. I'm like, we should see overlapping geometry. And if we switch to wireframe, we do. We do see overlapping geometry, which is maybe not the best because now we've got a ton of extra geometry, but we can work with that. We can get rid of it and whatnot. But we can now have all of those different layers with different amounts of noise. So, like, we could even increase the amount of voxels on the sand and whatnot. But now this is pretty smooth, and we do see that hard line between the sand and the rock. let me just adjust the sand real quick because it's bothering me. It's not going all the way to the edge. So let's bring that up a little bit too much, to be honest, and then rotate it so that we get that wedge. Although, yeah, that is too much. That's too much. So let's bring this down and then just bring it down to where it doesn't eat into the sand. There we go. And actually, we could bring it down even further, rotate it. There we go. Now we get some more interesting rocks right there. Oh, and that's looking so cool. Let's actually just real quick scale this up. I just want to see like I want to see it with like a water level. And we're going to plug this into the output so we don't have to worry so much on that. And we can grab that on the Z and just like, I don't know, just trying to imagine it a little bit. You know, we're not quite at the point where it's easy to see exactly how this will look, but we've got sand, we've got rock, we've got cliff, we've got all those interesting layers, and like it's a nice rocky beach. We should probably adjust some of the rocks so that it's actual beach. Like this is just a rocky coast at this point. We don't have anywhere where it's beachy, but maybe we expand the whole voxel grid at some point and we see more of this terrain, or even mix like this is maybe the noise we have for a rocky terrain, and we could set up more noise values for a beach terrain and then use our mix use a mix node to mix between the different kinds of noise. And again, that's only if we want to keep it all on the same geometry. We could just merge different pieces of geometry, different volume cubes together to get those interesting combinations of terrain. Pros and cons to all of these different options, but I'm pretty darn happy with that. This needs smoothed out. It needs more detail, more attention to detail. It needs more work kind of in general, but it's far closer to what we had, to what I'm imagining, what I'd like to get to than what we have done in the last few weeks. So I'm pretty darn happy with that. And as I said a couple of minutes ago, I do want to bring in some noise to keep the top from being so flat. So let's do that. And then I think I'm going to call it for the day. This has been a huge amount of progress. And thank you guys for hanging out. But anyway, yeah, a couple more things before we go. Because I'm also realizing we have a bunch of floating pieces of geometry. And I do want to show how we can go ahead and get rid of that. So what we're going to do is bring in a mesh island node. And because we're combining geometry... yeah, I don't want to do this after the join geometry because then we'll delete some of our hard work. But anyway, what we're going to do is get a compare node in here and the index node. And we're going to take the index, compare it, set this to integer, and then compare it to the island index. Then we can just use a separate geometry or delete geometry, either or, whatever your preference is. And we'll just leave that to point. And then what we can do is let's take a look at our main geometry here. This is all the rock and whatnot. And let's just take a look at the selection. Invert the selection? Hold on. Oh. I'm sorry. I was overthinking it, thinking about something else. We want to make sure that our island index is greater than 0. And basically what we would do is delete that. I'm going to get rid of the separate geometry just because sometimes that can make it harder to think through. Like it's got the selection and the inversion and all of that. So now we have just mesh island 1. There are instances where the main geometry may not have an index of 0. So we need to be careful and keep that in mind. But for now, this is good enough, you know? Also, you can apply the modifier and smooth it manually using brush. That's a good point. this is the kind of thing where like I like to keep everything procedural, but at the end of the day, it's about making whatever piece of media, piece of content, piece of whatever that you're going to make. So if you make this tool, then apply it. You can, yeah, go in, paint your vertices, smooth it out, use whatever you want, whatever other methods, there are available to us in Blender to smooth it out and make it what you want. But this gives you all of the main strokes, right? So what are you working on? Great question. And I haven't talked about this in depth. I like to make a lot of tools and a lot of procedural workflows. I do have a project that I'm working on, but I haven't really talked about it a ton yet. And without giving a ton away, because I have some plans for discussing that in the future, for me, the long short of it is I want to make a planet. So I'm working on terrain, and we've been talking about beaches because I have another project that is a little smaller in scope that focuses around a beach. And I want to focus on some life simulations. And I'm okay talking about that because some of my content I've already talked about. Conway's Game of Life. I've made a stream talking about my own reaction diffusion, cellular automata. And so what I want here is to take some of the simulations I've already made that talk about like life and evolution and lots of little guys running around on a sphere, basically. I want to take some of those algorithms and apply it to a terrain. And that's why I keep playing around with terrains, is because working on a video where we discuss my own life sim and then apply it not just on a sphere, which is what I've done recently, but also talk about terrain and how things can like spread and grow and change on an interesting and dynamic terrain. All of that probably sounds really crazy and out there, but it'll be interesting, I promise. It'll be very fun, actually, because I have, well, we can do that in a minute. I want to wrap this up, and then we can maybe talk about that project, and I can show a couple of things that are that I've shown before, but we could talk about some things that have happened in previous streams, if you guys would like to. So anyway, yeah, that's my method for getting rid of all of the weird little floating pieces of geometry that don't really add to anything. And because we have two different pieces of geometry, it'd be best to do that on both of them. But this is just sand, so it's all going to be one piece of geometry, so we don't really need to worry about that. So let's get rid of this input on the join geometry. And now if we get rid of that, we have our combined geometry without all the little floating pieces. So I'm glad I remembered to talk about that because I really wanted to make sure to talk about that before we ended the stream. And then, as I keep saying, one last thing, I want to just kind of get rid of the flatness up here. So how do we go about doing that? I think we're going to do one more noise texture. And we're going to just kind of carve off the top. So where is our main piece of geometry? Let's actually group all of this stuff together. Geometry nodes is just visual coding for 3D modelers. Yeah, basically. It's actually something that, well, A, I love. It just works so well with my brain. And B, a little bit upset because it is purely visual coding. I actually like a mix of playing around with nodes and writing my own code into nodes. You're able to do that in Houdini, but Blender doesn't have support for its own coding language. And I understand why we don't have a Python node in here. That could get really messy and potentially dangerous. But I wish we had a script node where we could just write in a few lines of code that then could be used, procedurally throughout our workflow. But yeah, it's just visual scripting, visual coding for geometry. And it's so much fun. But okay, so we have noise texture. Let's see, we're going to want to play with this volume cube because that's all of our rock. And I guess what we could do, you know what, let's just plug this straight into our density so we can see what we're doing and get this transformed. We are normalizing. Let's turn off normalizing for a second. Ooh, why are you being so weird? That doesn't feel right. Hold on. Oh, it's because we're deleting the geometry. Hold on. We just need to make sure that that's off so that it doesn't try and delete what we're working on. Okay, so let's turn down our resolution. Turn off normalize. Make sure we're positive. It doesn't really matter, but I like to keep my values positive, if at all possible. Oh, and turn the scale down on our noise texture. Okay. There we go. Get something that's interesting, like a big scale, a really big scale piece of geometry. Let's move this up. Maybe stretch that slope out. Like, I really just want one big shape to kind of control where the cutoff is and even flatten that out even more. Just gotta get this to be the right scale, you know? I want just a little bit more variance at the top of the cliffs. So we gotta really flatten out this noise. There's maybe a different noise texture that we could use to work with this a little more easily, but I digress. Let's get a little bit more now that we've flattened it out. And then what I think we should be able to do is say, okay, we've got this, we've got that. What is the maximum of the two? I hesitate just because I'm thinking, will that do what I want it to? No. So we need to just do the minimum. I always get those two confused. But now, if we take a look at this, it's not perfectly flat. It's not perfectly flat, and of course we can use this to adjust as we see fit, you know? Bring it down more, bring it up more, just not quite all the way to the top of our volume cube. And we need to be careful that nothing down here gets cut off. Like I said, I don't know that this is the best texture. Or, hold on. Let's do it in 2D. That should help. No, because it's going to be true or false along here. I was just thinking, like, then we wouldn't have that third axis to worry about, so it doesn't get cut off at the bottom, but that'll take more time and effort for me to think through how would we do that with just 2D. I think this is good enough for now. We've managed to chop off just a little bit at the top and get it not quite so uniform. It still looks pretty flat, but nothing a little bit more effort can't fix, you know? Or I can just call it there because that's pretty close to the boundary and it's just not perfectly flat. So I'm happy with that. That has been some excellent work for this stream. Let's turn on our delete node, get rid of those couple little floating points there. Ha, floating points. Some days I just make myself laugh. And yeah. Oh, that's so cool and so interesting. We're going to have a lot of fun playing with this. I do want to maybe make this bigger in the future and make it so that we do have a smoother transition down to the sand and we have a little bit more beach. In fact, what we could do is maybe establish a curve for the sand so that it starts more up here and then drops off somewhere because, you know, sand banks do drop off. That is a valid thing, but it is now noon. I would like to go get some lunch. Noon my time. So thank you all so much for watching. If you guys want, chime in now, and we can maybe talk about a couple more things, but otherwise, I think I'm going to wrap it up here. Let's just... I don't recall how much delay there is in chat, so I'll give you guys a second. If you want to discuss anything further, if you have any more questions, if you want me to go through how the noise controls work, because we did that basically in the first half hour of the stream and haven't really touched on it much since, and I know people have been in and out and whatnot, so if anybody missed that and want to go over that, because that was the main thing today, I'd be happy to. And I think some of the next things I want to try and address with this would be to kind of determine, okay, what different kinds of rocks we have. And that may sound really stupid because, like, why? We have all the shapes and whatnot. Different kinds of rocks erode in different ways, and I think it would be really cool to then get an erosion sim. But most erosion sims just assume one density, one hardness of all the rocks, and if we have layers, we should be able to assign different hardnesses and have them different kinds of them erode at different rates. It's 2202 in my country. 22 is too... No. Oh. Every time I'm like, oh, how do we convert? It's 24 minus 12. Or that minus 24, it's 10 p.m. I want to say. Not that you're going to confirm or deny you're using the 24-hour clock. You're fine. I'm just trying to think through, okay, what time of day is that? It's late. I'm glad to see you here, Salah, all the time. I really appreciate it because it sounds like you stay up pretty late. I hope that's not just for this, but if it is, thank you. Thank you for hanging out and watching. I really appreciate it. It's a fun time. I hope you have fun too. But yeah, I think... thanks for thanks for typing it in chat. I appreciate it because I was just struggling. Some days I can do math and stream. Other days... not so much. But yeah, I think we're good here. So, all right, thank you all so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, depending on how much of the day is left for you. And I will see you all next week. So, yeah, a lot of fun. Heck yeah. So anyway, thank you all so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye. And where's the button? I said this at the beginning of the stream. I need buttons for this, for switching scenes. Anyway, okay, for real this time. I'll see you all later. Wow, I really can't find the button for this. Yeah, I'm going to go have some lunch because my brain has stopped functioning. There it is. Jeez, thanks for watching Screen. I have it labeled. Anyway, thank you so much. I'm going to go have lunch. Bye.